Good afternoon, 8th grade students. We are continuing to read The Greatest Treasure Hunt in History, the Story of the Monuments Men. We are beginning today about the second paragraph on page 27. Then there was Captain Robert Posey, an outsider to the group of art scholars and museum men, but very much an insider when it came to the military. Posey loved soldiering. It was in his blood. Stout didn't know much about him other than he wasn't a member of Paul Sock's Harvard Circle. Posey was an architect, however, and that skill plus his military training made him invaluable to the group. Stout did know that they shared one very important thing: young sons at home, whom they missed very much. Stout had retraced the situation in his mind countless times. There were just 11 men, including him, at least initially, and for who knew how long, responsible for protecting the accumulated artistic and cultural wealth of Western civilization located in Northern Europe from the destruction of war and theft by the Nazis. But the brainchild he had envisioned and what the Army provided him were worlds apart. With 11 men, one monuments man for every 80,000 U.S. Army soldiers, how were they going to get it done? Could it even be done? Stout didn't want to use the word impossible, but unlikely seemed about right. For the operation to have any success, they would certainly need some breaks along the way, especially from combat commanders in the field. 3 early assets provided hope. First, the monuments men went to war with a priority list of what needed to be saved. Volunteers in the United States skilled in the arts had compiled a monuments, fine arts, and archives list of protected monuments for each Western European country, with maps indicating the locations, which were then forwarded to the monuments men serving in Italy and those training in Shrivenham. They had also overlaid this information onto aerial reconnaissance photographs, providing pilots with critical imagery that would hopefully spare those sites from damage. The second asset wasn't a thing but a person, Captain Mason Hammond, the very first monuments man. Hammond's 5 months of experience in Sicily and the Italian mainland supplied insightful examples for General Eisenhower and his staff on what worked and what hadn't. Adjustments had already been made to the invasion plans for Northern Europe that they hoped would provide a critical edge for Stout and his team, assets that Hammond did not have in Italy. With Hammond in London, attached to Eisenhower's staff, the monuments men in the field had someone in their corner who was reliable, trustworthy, and experienced in what they were about to do. General Eisenhower himself was the third source of encouragement. Ike, like Hammond, had struggled with how to fight a war in a country that for all practical purposes was a museum. Initially, Eisenhower did not believe that the monuments men needed any special endorsement of their mission from the senior commander. By December 1943, he realized he had been wrong. The order that he issued on December 29, 1943, transformed the monuments operation in Italy from that point forward by providing the explicit backing of the senior military commander. But it came late, after 6 months of combat. Not wanting to repeat the same mistake, and no doubt a consequence of Mason Hammond's admonitions, Eisenhower issued a similar order to all commanders 11 days before D-Day. Beads of salt water dripping off the rim of his helmet awakened him. George Stout wasn't sure how long he had been dozing, but he remembered thinking about Eisenhower in his order. Reaching into his leather jacket pocket, he pulled out the order, and with a great sense of pride in their mission, read the first paragraph again. Shortly, we will be fighting our way across the continent of Europe in battles designed to preserve our civilization. Inevitably, in the path of our advance will be found historical monuments and cultural centers, which symbolize to the world all that we are fighting to preserve. It is the responsibility of every commander to protect and respect these symbols whenever possible. The sight of hundreds of anchored ships with a canopy of protected barrage balloons overhead confirmed for Stout and the others on board that they had reached their destination, Utah Beach. Getting ashore involved more waiting. Since being in the Army, he had taken to heart a soldier's saying, "Hurry up and wait." Around 11 o'clock a.m., Stout stood on deck and watched as vessels at anchor began a makeshift fireworks display. Even war wasn't going to interrupt the chance to celebrate the 4th of July. After all, the Navy had plenty of explosives. A rhino barge carried them the rest of the way. Not once did Stout take his eyes off the sand wall overlooking the exposed beaches. Like everyone who set foot on any one of the D-Day landing beaches, Stout felt anguish for the soldiers who had made the same journey on June 6th into a torrent of gunfire. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like on Omaha Beach, where Germans high above on cliffs could shoot down on the American soldiers scrambling for safety. It reminded him of the nightmarish trench warfare and the scenes of carnage he had witnessed during World War I. Lieutenant George Wilson, who had reached Normandy the same week as Stout, made observations universal to the soldiers who had seen those beaches. I'm sure much of the horrific results of that battle had been cleared away and all the dead and wounded were gone. Still, the terrible scars of war seemed to shout at us. Burned out vehicles, sunken landing craft, ships, tanks, guns, pillboxes lay twisted and still. It hardly seemed possible anyone could have survived. Yet men had waded in and driven the Germans back, now some 7 or 8 miles inland in most places. Like many arriving soldiers, Wilson had freedom of movement the first few days and used them to wander around the battle area. What he saw sickened him. The ghastly stories we had heard about the fierceness of the fighting were true. German war prisoners were digging up the partially decomposed bodies of their own dead, buried in neat rows in mass graves about 3 feet deep. For movement to a new location. Working with shovels and bare hands, the prisoners stuffed the corpses into mattress covers and piled them on trucks in rows like cordwood. Some of the bodies were badly mangled and very difficult to pick up. Stern-faced men turned white, and many had to turn away to vomit at the sight and smell. Later that evening, after reporting to 1st Army Headquarters, after laying out his bedroll in the sand of Utah Beach under a star-filled sky, and after the excitement of a German plane passing overhead spraying the beach with machine gun fire, Stout thought about the irony of the day. This was the second time he had set foot on French soil during war. It happened on the 168th anniversary of the day when 13 American colonies renounced British rule and declared their independence as a newly formed nation. Now those two nations, once at war with each other, were united in their determination to defeat Nazi Germany. And France, the nation that had provided early critical support to those United States, would at some point be the first country in Northern Europe to be liberated and regain its own independence with their assistance. With first light at 6 o'clock a.m., Stout needed to get what sleep he could. It would be one of many precious commodities in the busy days ahead. I think we're going to go into chapter 3 and read a little bit into that chapter. Little Saints Help Us. On the Road to Siena, Italy, July 4th, 1944. As his Jeep made its way north from Rome to Siena, Dean Keller marveled at the beauty of the Tuscan countryside. Vast golden wheat fields accented by groves of green cypress trees covered undulating hills as far as the eye could see. 600-year-old bell towers emerged from the distant ridgeline set against an endless blue sky. The tranquility of the drive made it easy for him to forget about the war, but it was always just one gunshot, one destroyed building, one dead American boy away from smothering any other thought. Keller entered Siena on the 4th of July, one day after the city's liberation by Fifth Army troops who had been charging north since taking Rome. To avoid a catastrophic fight in the center of a medieval art-filled town, the German commander, General Field Marshal Albert Smiling Al Kesselring, so called because of his effortless and ever-present grin, had declared Siena an open city. Under this arrangement, Allied troops refrained from attacking while German forces withdrew. Only 2 hours separated the opposing armies. Keller pulled out his field journal and noted that despite minor damage, Siena had been artistically bypassed. After making sure out-of-bounds signs had been posted on the 50 buildings and churches on the MFA list of protected monuments, Keller wanted to check the status of the city's legendary works of art. First, he had to figure out where they were. Just 1 week earlier, monuments officers DeWald and Codd had conducted their inspection of the Naples treasures. During their walk through the Vatican storage area, they saw thousands of crates from museums in Milan, Venice, and Rome, but none from the art-rich cities of Tuscany, in particular, Florence and Siena. Officials in Rome did have lists indicating the locations of the various Tuscan repositories, but they considered them outdated. No cause for worry, they said. Superintendent of Florentine galleries, Giovanni Poggi, had no doubt relocated the art treasures back into the cities out of the way of the coming ground battle. On July 8th, Keller and his carabinieri driver, Giuseppe, pulled up to the bishop's palace in Manzanello, the most important of the 3 major Sienese art repositories, caked in dust. Tuscany was beautiful, but driving on the roads was a punishing experience, like wading through talcum powder. While the Open City Declaration had spared Siena from war, it hadn't extended as far as Manzanello, about 18 miles outside the city. Allied forces had just wrenched control of the area from German troops. French-manned artillery batteries, part of Fifth Army forces, pounded German positions nearby. We're going to stop there on page 34. Pick back up on Monday. I hope you have a really good weekend. Take care.